코넬 대학에서 두 CEO를 만나보겠습니다. 첫 번째 초대 손님은 사업과 과학을 접합시킨 콜비스의 데이빗 휴버 박사.
The idea of an all-optical network has been really the holy grail of the industry for many years.
두 번째 손님은 HGS의 윌리엄 헤이즐틴 박사.
We are now in the process of manufacturing the first genomics-based drugs.
최첨단 기술 산업에 있는 CEO들의 이야기를 들어보시죠.
Exclusive national funding for this program is provided by A.T. Kearney, a global management consulting firm helping businesses achieve results with capabilities in strategy, operations, and technology. A.T. Kearney, right there with you.
신사 승객 여러분, 그리고 코넬대 존슨 경영대학원 학생 여러분, CNN의 상임 분석가 제프 그린필드입니다.
Hi, welcome to CEO Exchange. I'm Jeff Greenfield. When we think of scientific breakthroughs, we picture a solitary figure alone in a laboratory pursuing the deepest mysteries of the planet or of the human body. It's not that easy to picture that same figure at the head of a company amid the clamor of the marketplace in Wall Street. But that is where my guests find themselves today. As scientists and as an engineer, they work in the fields of biotech medicine and in telecommunications. And if they're right about what they're doing, they will literally change the world. And as CEOs, if they're right, they'll probably be billionaires. Dr. David Huber is CEO of Corvus Corporation. That is a privately held company that builds what he calls all optical telecommunications networks. In brief, he uses light and light waves to transmit data and to transmit far more of it far faster than is done now. And I'll be talking with Dr. Huber later in the show. First, Dr. Wiliam Haseltine. He is CEO and founder of Human Genome Sciences. His task is nothing less than deciphering the information contained within human genes, and with them, the creation of new drugs created from proteins found within those genes. And those genetically based drugs may rejuvenate organs and cells, grow new blood vessels, and cure so many ills that within a generation, the human lifespan, your human lifespan, will exceed 100 years. As Dr. Haseltine puts it, the fountain of youth may well be found within us.
I'm really delighted. It looks like we have a purified protein here.
하얀 가운을 입은 윌리엄 헤이즐틴 박사는 CEO라기보다는 과학자의 모습에 가깝습니다.
I have never drifted from science. I am deeply embedded in science. My definition is a scientist who wishes to make scientific progress in the service of medicine.
HGS의 창립자이자 회장인 헤이즐틴 박사는 인간의 유전자에 숨겨져 있는 정보의 힘을 불어넣으려 하고 있습니다. 그 정보를 이용해서 질병을 예언하고 예방하고 치료할 수 있는 새로운 약을 개발하려고 하고 있죠. HGS는 이미 그런 약을 만들 수 있는 유전자를 115개 이상 특허를 얻어놓은 상태입니다.
We are now in the process of manufacturing the first genomics-based drugs. These are human genes and human proteins that we use as drugs themselves. The concept is to create new drugs like insulin, growth hormone, where you use a human gene to manufacture the human protein, which is your drug.
윌리엄 헤이즐틴은 과학과 함께 성장했습니다. 그의 아버지는 미군 무기를 개발하던 분이었죠. 1960년대 다른 학생들은 시위를 하던 시절 헤이즐틴은 물리학과 화학연구실에 틀어박혀 있었습니다. 그리고 하버드로 가 분자생물학으로 박사학위를 취득했고 그곳에서 학생들을 가르칩니다. 그런 다음 보스턴에 있는 다나파모암 연구소에서 암과 에이즈를 연구했죠. 1991년 헤이즐틴은 비버리 힐즈에 있는 게일 헤이먼의 창립자이자 CEO인 게일 헤이먼과 결혼했습니다. 그의 아내 게일은 조르지오 향수를 만들어내 백만장자가 되었죠.
Bill is an extremely talented guy. He's incredibly intelligent. He's one of the smartest guys out there. He had a tremendous amount of vision in the early days with regards to the role of genomics, and he continues to bring that vision to running Human Genome Sciences.
위험 부담이 크고 경쟁이 심한 생명공학 산업의 개척자인 헤이즐틴은 1984년 자신의 첫 생명공학 회사를 설립했습니다. 자신의 7번째 회사인 HGS는 1992년에 세워졌죠. 그 이후로 투입된 투자 금액은 7억 달러가 넘습니다.
Decisions to make on a day-by-day basis that
연구 개발비는 엄청나게 들었고 대부분의 신약은 제품화하는데 각각 4억 달러 정도가 들었습니다. 그리고 개발 기간만 해도 7년 이상 걸렸죠.
They've got drugs in various stages of human trials now. If some of those work, that'll get them a start. And it's true that developing drugs is a costlier, more cumbersome, slower process than extracting genetic information. It's also true that if you get a blockbuster drug and you make $1 billion a year on something, that can cover a lot of costs of genomic information.
또 다른 부담감도 있습니다. 복제양이나 유전자 변이 채소 같은 연구 성과를 보고 일반인들은 두려움까지 느끼고 있죠. 클린턴 전 미국 대통령과 토니 블레어 영국 총리는 2000년 3월 양국의 인간 게놈 연구 프로젝트의 자료를 공유하는 데 동의했습니다. 그러자 주식시장의 반등으로 생명공학 회사들은 타격을 입었죠. 다른 생명공학 회사들처럼 HGS의 주가도 곤두박질 쳤습니다. 그러나 유전자 지도와 몇 가지 정보를 팔고 나머지 특허권을 유지하는 식의 헤이즐틴의 사업적 전략 덕분에 주가는 다시 회복됐죠. 헤이즐틴의 생각이 맞다면 미래에는 우리 자신의 몸을 이용해서 병을 고치는 약이 나오게 될 겁니다. 그렇다면 많은 사람들은 두려움을 떨쳐버리고 헤이즐틴에게 고마워하는 날이 오겠죠.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Wiliam Haseltine of Human Genome Sciences. Welcome. Thanks for being here.
it's a great pleasure.
Did there come a time early when you knew you were good at science, in the sense that somebody else might know that he could hit a tennis ball better than a lot of other people? Was there something that...
I wasn't sure I was good at it, but I knew I loved it. I remember being a student at freshman Berkeley, 3,000 students in our Chem 1A class. And at the end of the year being very worried that I'd passed and looking at the curve.
You're one of those people that used to drive me crazy in school. You'd always worry about whether you'd passed. You'd get the 99 and I'd flunk.
That's right.
Okay. These questions make it a lot tougher now. I just want to warn you.
I would have been happy to help you.
Wouldn't have helped. Not in these fields. You mentioned Berkeley. You were at Berkeley during one of the most tumultuous times in American academic history.
Right.
Affected much by it?
Yeah, I was deeply affected by it. It was a radicalizing experience. I started off as a very conservative young man, coming right out of a military base, right into the cauldron of Berkeley in 1964. But I'm happy to say I was the first student to jump in front of the police car when they arrested Jack Weinberg, that helped trigger the free speech movement.
So you were radicalized, but was science still, were you still spending your time in the lab as opposed to the streets?
I actually had, in my early career, I had two careers. I actually did a lot of anti-war work and was a rather successful anti-war journalist. I broke the Agent Orange 2,4-D story. I wrote for the New Republic, and I actually organized a anti-war center at Harvard and traveled all over the country. Took 2 extra years of graduate work doing that.
But that never pulled you fully away from your work as a scientist?
Well, I'll tell you a funny story. At the same time I was doing these experiments, they weren't going well. Laboratory work is extremely arduous. And one day I'd conceived of an experiment almost as a control and made a really important discovery. And my boss at that time was James D. Watson, the discoverer of DNA. I called him up and I said, Jim, this is what I found. His first remark was, now you'll be a scientist. He didn't say great, he didn't say that's a fabulous discovery. He was interested in creating scientists. Once I'd made that discovery, I didn't leave that laboratory for a year. I literally worked 24 hours a day.
Slept in the lab?
Slept in the lab between timers. You know, when you do biologies, you sort of cook things up. So I actually slept in that laboratory. I went home on Sunday afternoons.
So if you had not had that breakthrough that early, perhaps it might not have, this might not have
probably would have been sitting where you are. Scientist journal. Science journalist.
One thing I can assure you is I would not have been sitting where you are, given my background. You're heading up research at Dana-Farber,
right,
at Harvard. You're doing breakthrough research in AIDS as a scientist at a university. When does business beckon? When does a voice in your ear say, I assume he'd be familiar enough to say, Bill, you should be coming into the marketplace with this stuff?
That actually isn't what happened. What happened is I always had a very practical bent. There are some professors who are interested in the field itself, don't look beyond their own work. They do wonderful work. And others, like me, who are always interested in the practical aspects. When I had a choice of where to go as a young professor, I chose to go to the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, then part of Harvard, still is part of Harvard, because they were trying to work at that interface between science and medicine. I wanted my career to make a difference to people's lives, a difference to medicine.
So pure research was never...
It was pure research, but it was research that had a simultaneous impact. I think I've made many fundamental discoveries about the living world, and I'm still doing that. But they're always for a purpose. My guiding light, I call myself a humanist, not a scientist. My goal is to change human life for the better. Science is the tool I use to do that. That differentiates me very sharply from many of my colleagues who would define themselves as a scientist for science. So when it became clear in the late 70s and early 80s that there was a route to take this knowledge and apply it for human good through creating new medicines, not just through creating new knowledge, I was very pleased. So I started my first biotechnology company in 1981. That was about the same time that I became interested in AIDS. So I was doing two things simultaneously, starting companies, I have now started 7, and doing fundamental research at the university.
That's what I want to pick up on, but let me just ask my first impolite question. Did it also occur to you that as a businessman you could make a lot more money than as a researcher?
I think money is such a powerful force in people's life that they assume that everybody is after it. Mm-hmm. In fact, I would say in my life that hasn't been the primary motivation. It's to use the tools society provides you to get a job done. A company is a great tool. Money is a great tool to get things done. But I see it more in that context of something useful, something that allows you to do what you need to do more effectively.
Speaking of which, so this sounds familiar in the sense that when you talk about what you do, you differentiate your research in biotechnology from, say, mapping the human genome. Mm-hmm. It almost sounds, and that's what everybody's talking about these days. We're going to map the human genome. And I take it to some extent, your argument is, okay, go ahead, but it isn't my turf. I'm interested in something else. Am I right about this?
You're absolutely right. I call the Human Genome Project, a little facetiously, a techno-folly. It's a great technical feat like putting a man on the moon. But 30 years later, looking back at putting a man on the moon, it doesn't change human life that much. But something was occurring at the same time, which does change human life. And that was launching all of those communication satellites that makes the internet possible, that makes this e-commerce possible, makes cell telephones possible. The analogy here is a government-sponsored project to sequence all of the human genome, or to isolate that 3%, which is useful for science and medicine, which is genes, which you can use as a practical tool. If you give me a human gene in its form that the body uses it to make a protein, I can tell you what it does in your body, and if it has a medical use, I can discover it. If you give me the genome, the packaging for genes that are all busted and scattered along, I can't even tell you where the genes are, much less produce knowledge that's of medical use or practical use.
Okay, so then let's talk about what you are after. You are looking for genes that have specific purposes that you can use to prevent or to cure diseases, to grow new organs perhaps eventually, new cells?
The big idea behind the company, Human Genome Sciences, is that it's going to be possible to use our generative capacity, the capacity that allows us to go from a single fertilized egg to an adult human, to maintain our bodies and to repair our bodies when injured, to use that innate power of our bodies as the source of the new medicine. Now that power is contained in the genes. Each gene makes a protein that causes cells to behave in various ways. So our concept is, rather than going to the test tube for chemicals or to plants for chemicals, we go to the human body, isolate the genes that make the substances that build our bodies and repair our bodies. Those substances, the genes themselves, are the proteins, will be the substance of the new medicine.
And you are now engaged in clinical trials with genetic drugs, would that be the way to put it?
Well,
that can
they're
actually,
gene-based drugs.
Gene-based drugs that can actually grow blood vessels?
They can grow blood vessels, they stimulate the immune system, they help the body repair its surfaces, whether it's the skin when it's burned, or the lining of the gastrointestinal tract if injured.
And this is a concept I know that the people have a hard time getting their heads around. You patent these genes, is that right?
That's not how we make money. We will make our money as a company in a very traditional way by bringing new ways to treat disease to patients. It's called a pharmaceutical company. If you think of a chemical drug, let's take Viagra, people invested in that as a heart medication. They actually spent about $200 million to bring that to patients over a period of about 10 years. Huge investment. They wouldn't have made that investment unless that chemical compound was patented. Well, our drugs are human components, just like insulin. You may be surprised to know that the gene for insulin is patented. A patent is a necessary tool for investment.
You don't regard this as a giant leap forward or backward in patent law or patent concept. It's the same thing as patenting anything else.
A human gene is a complicated chemical. The laws and the regulations that govern patenting of human genes and their proteins are the same that govern natural substances such as Taxol taken from trees. In fact, if I were still at the university and I made a new discovery about a human gene and its medical use, the US law says I have to patent it. I don't have a choice. It's the law. If I use government funding and make a discovery and I'm in the university, I must patent it and I must transfer it to the private sector.
But there is one area that I wanted to ask you about before we move to the next phase. You said we need no longer be alone as the only intelligent species on the planet. And you talked about down the road this notion that we might be able to communicate by thought. We might be able to have things inserted in our body that help us remember 1,000 times more than we do now. And at that point you said, once you begin to engineer things at that level, those things are alive. They can reproduce themselves. I mention this because just recently the head of Sun Microsystems Science Department in Wired said, you know, as a technophile, I'm now frightened at what I see. Should he be frightened?
Bill Joy, who wrote the article you mentioned, was concerned about the integration of information technology with our nervous system. There are great opportunities. Imagine you didn't have to remember anything. There it was, the entire Encyclopedia Britannica embedded as a chip in your head. Well, it has some interesting positive possibilities, and it has some possibilities for communication control, for knowledge about you and how you think that you might not want to share with others. So those are the kind of issues that he was writing about that are really serious issues for us all to consider in a very serious way. These aren't going to be trivial.
You've raised a lot of provocative questions, but for now I really want to thank you, Dr. Haseltine, for speaking with us. You'll be back with us. Dr. Haseltine will be back later to discuss in more detail his work in biotechnology and some of the dilemmas it will involve. But now we want to introduce you to our next guest, who heads a company that you probably haven't heard much about, but I dare say you will. Dr. David Huber is the founder and CEO of Corvus Corporation. His work, put quite simply, may well revolutionize, and I use that word deliberately and cautiously, revolutionize the way all of us send and retrieve information of every kind.
So let's talk about how the Corvus solution helps to fill this need for enormous bandwidth.
데이빗 휴버 박사는 예전에는 벤처 자본가들에게 강의를 했습니다. 이제는 자신의 새로운 직원들에게 강의를 하죠. 휴버가 CEO로 있는 콜비스는 광통신망 회사입니다. 콜비스의 광통신망 덕분에 정부의 세계는 고속도로에서 경주장으로 바뀌게 되었습니다.
At Corvus, we're really focusing on the next wave, which is the all-optical network, which will be so much more efficient than the old products, which get their networking capability exclusively from electronics.
갑작스러운 수요의 증가로 전기통신 산업에도 기술 향상의 바람이 불었고 이제는 구리선 대신에 광섬유 케이블이 사용되고 있습니다. 2년 차인 콜비스는 보다 신속하고 대용량의 광통신망을 가능하게 하는 장비 시장을 점유하기 위해서 전력 투구를 하고 있습니다.
The market for optical equipment, really, which what Corvus is aimed at, is probably a bit more than $10 billion this year, but growing maybe as much as 40 to 50%. So it could be $15 billion in 2001, and it could be $20 to $25 billion in 2002.
콜비스는 휴버의 두 번째 시도입니다. 1992년 그는 또 다른 광통신망 제공업체인 시에나를 설립했습니다. 1997년 시에나를 공개하면서 83억 달러를 벌어들였고 이는 그의 최고의 공모주로 뽑혔죠. 휴버는 콜비스를 시작하자마자 시에나를 떠났습니다.
He's a manager that hires people and then empowers them to do the job.
그렇지만 그 일만 있는 게 아니죠. 콜비스가 만들고 있는 기계는 자료를 광전파의 형태로 바꿔주기 때문에 한 번도 끊어지지 않고서도 3,000km 이상을 갈 수 있습니다. 현재 기술력보다 5배는 빠른 거죠. 투자자들도 생겨났습니다. 벤처계의 거물급 자금 시장이 이미 콜비스에 3억 달러에 가까운 돈을 투자했습니다. 브리그램 영 대학에서 박사 학위를 받은 휴버는 이미 젊은 나이에 과학에 대한 열정을 품었습니다. 오레곤 북동부의 시골에서 자란 휴버는 농업 전문가 겸 교사의 아들이었죠.
I can remember I was about 5 years old. Our neighbor gave me an electric motor that came out of a washing machine. And I took that electric motor apart at the age of 5 and was able to get it reassembled. And in fact, I even plugged it into the wall and operated the thing. You can imagine a washing machine motor just rolling around. When you plugged it in, it had so much torque it would take off.
데이빗 휴버의 꿈은 시간과 공간을 점령하겠다는 겁니다. 그는 전국을 초고속 정보 네트워크로 묶겠다는 생각을 실현하고 있습니다. 2000년 봄, 콜비스는 장비를 현장 실험 단계에 투입했습니다. 이 작업은 촉망받는 전자통신 사업자들인 브로잉윙, 윌리엄스, 퀘스트와 함께했습니다. 2년 이상이 걸린 연구 개발 기간을 마친 지금 이제 콜비스가 수익을 낼 때가 다가온 겁니다.
Once they get going, once they start selling it, they'll have an annual revenue run rate of at least 100 million, pretty much straight off the bat.
그 정도 금액이면 시작하는 회사치고는 상당한 액수죠. 콜비스의 CEO인 데이빗 휴버에게 이러한 새로운 미래를 실현시켜줄 수 있는 건 바로 미세한 광섬유 케이블입니다.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the man who has been called the Light Knight, Dr. David Huber of the Corvus Corporation.
Hello, welcome.
Tough act to follow.
It really is.
Let me just ask you one question, which is this notion that there comes a time early when you know not only that you're interested in something, but that you're good at something.
No, I think the thing that characterized my childhood and youth was this desire to create something different. A lot of people talk about being bored. I've never been bored ever in my life. I always had something I was very intently interested in doing, and anytime I had time, I would pursue that.
When did you enter, when did the private sector beckon you? How did that happen that you moved into a more commercial element?
It was in 1988 and 1989 that the erbium fiber amplifier was under development. And I had an opportunity to go to General Instrument to explore the possibility of using this optical amplifier for commercial CATV applications. And that was really a tremendous turning point in the optical communications industry.
And you very early on, I take it, looked at this and, pardon the pun, saw the light.
Yes, that's right.
Is it simply the sheer power of this device to transmit stuff, so much more stuff, so much faster?
During the past 4 years, since optical amplifiers have become commercial, the performance of optical communication has increased more than 16,000 times. And that type of improvement in performance and productivity is unprecedented in any other industry, I believe.
And I suppose you could consider it, I don't know if it's a happy accident or not, that at the very time when this device comes on scene, within a few years, the internet shows up and the demand for more and faster and give me more bandwidth becomes explosive. So,
yes, in your comments at the beginning of the show, you made a comment that the optical communications may be the basis for the internet communications. Well, today, there is no other medium that is even remotely able to provide the backbone for the internet and other types of communication. It's only optical communication. There's no competition.
It's the first time I've been accused of an understatement, by the way. Thank you. So, you're at General Instruments, you're looking at this new device, and you leave, you then take this great leap. Was that not a fairly risky thing to leave a large, successful company and start your own company?
Absolutely. I risked everything financially. And a lot of times the entrepreneurs, I guess the press today heaps a lot of glitter and things like that on entrepreneurs, but the facts are that most entrepreneurs are not successful. And many times they lose all their money. A lot of times they lose their families because there's a lot of stress involved. Dr. Haseltine mentioned that he worked very long hours. A lot of times that takes a real toll in other parts of a person's life.
So it interests me because you're a soft-spoken, genial fellow, and yet this is the kind of risk you associate with kind of swashbucklers. You leave an established big company. I take it you're talking about risking your life savings or what there was of it, saying to your family, you may not see me for a while because I'm going to be spending nights and weekends.
I think the external veneer is maybe deceiving. Inside, when I see something I want to go after, I get very single-minded about that and go after it.
So having taken this enormous risk, personal, professional, you name it, you find yourself in this company that is doing incredibly well, produced a fair return on investment, if I may put it that way.
Yes, it was large.
Yeah, it seems impressive. And you leave. Because?
I saw a different vision than the rest of the board of directors. I saw the optical network vision that wasn't shared by the rest of the company and left to pursue that vision.
You found a company and then your own board of directors says, I don't know that this is going to work. At some point, then, you say, I have no choice.
Absolutely.
So we're sitting here with a group of future entrepreneurs. What's your guidance to them about that? I mean, can you take your experience and say, look, if you have this kind of vision, even if you may put everything at risk, you've just got to go for it?
Well, I don't know if I would give that advice. That's what I've done. You've got to make that choice yourself. But if you see something that looks like it's a much more efficient way to conduct business, that there's a value that could be created, and you're not adverse to risk, then go after it. Give it a try. It just might work.
So let's talk about where you are here at Corvus. This all-optical network, you are able to send data far further without having to boost it, right?
It's a little like traveling in Europe. If you go on a trip to Europe, you put $1,000 in an envelope, and when you arrive in the UK, you go to London and you turn all those dollars into pounds, and then you move from UK to the Netherlands, and then you go to Germany, turn those into marks and Swiss francs and so forth. And when you get back that $1,000, even though you didn't use it to buy anything, you'll find out that there's no money left in the envelope. So when you converting from the optical domain to the electrical domain, and then from the electrical domain back to the optical domain, it's a very inefficient process. But Corvus is the first and the only company that has commercial optical switching equipment. We have optical switching for the first time commercially available.
Well, let's just talk about the consequences if you are right and you bring your products to market and you succeed. For one thing, the telcos, the big telephone companies, the AT&Ts and MCIs and Sprints, you have just made obsolete, if this works, all their equipment, right?
I think that's correct.
Okay. Now, call me madcap, but I would think if I had invested a total, if you take these companies together, tens of billions of dollars, would that be a conservative estimate in this equipment?
Yes, it would be.
They're going to have to replace it, right?
The problems that all the telecoms have, whether they're entrenched or whether they're new telecoms, is how do they implement and provide new services? What do they do for the growth? And the growth is internet traffic, data traffic, entertainment services. So the problem for both the old players and the new players are how do we plan and how do we put equipment into our network to take the growth? So that's the problem. And the rest of the equipment that's already there just pretty much stays there and continues doing what it's doing today.
But as a CEO of this company, do you feel at times that you are sort of surrounded by bigger players who pose a threat to your business plan?
Absolutely. Big players have a lot of advantages. And so let's just, we've got a young audience here, but let's go back in time, 20 years, and let's ask the question, who are the major computer companies in the world? IBM, Unisys, DEC, what's the Data General? Those are the major players. Today, only one of those major computer companies is a survivor. Only IBM of all those has survived. So I think there's historic precedent that would say that perhaps the major telecom equipment players of today, a lot of them won't survive. And I won't name names, but I have very strong opinions of which ones of the major telecom equipment suppliers today will not survive.
David, thank you. We want to invite now Dr. Haseltine back to rejoin us, and we're going to have a conversation with the two of you. Dr. Haseltine, come on down. Thanks for rejoining us. Appreciate it. I want to turn first to what I guess we think of as the science as business question. And it has to do with some things that are taught at business schools, namely that there's a management skill you can learn that's fungible. It really doesn't matter what a company does. If you know how to manage and lead, you can be a good CEO. Would that work at Corvus?
No, I don't believe it would work. The great example is when I first got into telecommunications, I went to work for ITT. And this was exactly the management principles that were taught, and with great fanfare at ITT at the time. A good manager could manage any kind of business, but they had a fundamental problem. They had no vision, and they couldn't tell a good business from a bad business. So what they did is they stayed with Hostess Twinkies, Sheraton Hotels, Hartford insurance agencies, and they sold all the telecom, or virtually all the telecom interests to Alcatel. No vision of what would be a good business and what would be a lousy business.
What about at HGS, Dr. Haseltine? Suppose you decided to go back to the lab purely, and you just were tired of the marketplace and investors, and you got a CEO from, I don't know, Kodak, Motorola, somebody who didn't know the technology, the science.
I don't think it would work either. And we're living in a knowledge economy. Knowledge is the key tool. And I think it's that vision, it's the insight, and it's a fine technical judgment as to what will work and what won't work. All technologies are not equal. But what it takes is a combination of an intuitive as well as an educated understanding of technology and of people's needs. Because technologists can get it wrong too. For every example where a businessman has got it wrong, I can give you an example where somebody who's a technologist has got it wrong. I'll give you one from my own business. The biggest issue with this new technology is who's the customer. My inclination, my life is about the patient as the customer. But most of my competitors think it's the pharmaceutical researcher who's the customer. Now, I'm mystified by that. I don't think it's a surprise that most of my competitors are run by people who aren't scientists, who aren't dedicated to medicine. They have a business orientation. That's where the quick money can be made, they think. But that's not where the real business is.
How much are you invested in your vision to the point where you have to be careful to make sure that you are keeping your mind open to somebody who may say, you know, Dr. Huber, you're brilliant, you did all this, but I think you may be wrong about this.
Well, I think you always have to have a very open mind. If I see a technology that I like and that I want, I don't care if it was invented in-house or if it's from outside. If I can buy it or get it some way, I would go after it.
I think that for decisions like that, I agree with David. And I can't tell you how many people have said, you're not after the right market. You should be selling information. to researchers, you shouldn't be trying to develop drugs. It's too hard. We're big pharmaceutical companies, and we can't develop drugs. I think we can do it better. I think we can make better drugs. And it's that core vision that you have to stick to. And you have to be virtually a fanatic.
You've said, or been quoted as saying, I don't ever want to say that you said it, but I've read it, that you said that you thought that HTS could someday be the Microsoft of biotechnology. That's a fairly ambitious notion, isn't it?
Well, I think our notion is even more ambitious.
Oh, more ambitious, okay. Sorry.
That
I've never understated things so often in one session ever in my life. This is great.
I think that what we see is, you have to realize that health is probably the largest single component of our economy. In the United States, it's 14% of the GNP. I believe that pharmaceuticals, these new pharmaceuticals, can be at least half of that 14%. We can replace services with pharmaceuticals and give people better health. Because what are services but failures of health? We think we can keep people healthier through pharmaceuticals and therefore expand by a factor of 5 to 10 the pharmaceutical marketplace, which makes the numbers you've just mentioned small. So we think we can build a very big business, a very successful business that delivers better health.
But in your case, you also have the issue of public policy that I think must concern you about. We've already seen efforts to stop bioengineering of foods in some countries. There was a scare in the marketplace when President Clinton and Prime Minister Blair seemed to be suggesting, they weren't, that maybe genes shouldn't be patentable. So is your big concern in the area of what the public policy will do?
I'm not concerned about the technology. I think we're confident that the technology can deliver better health. But you've identified the area of concern. This bright future of better health is not inevitable. It can be stopped. It can be derailed relatively easily because we are probably in the most regulated business on earth. I don't think it's a bad thing, but we can get it wrong. We can get it very badly wrong. Let me give you one example of how badly wrong people get it. When the Europeans and the Japanese tried to restrict healthcare costs by squeezing that 10%, which is pharmaceuticals, while leaving relatively unchecked services because of political expedience, they destroyed their industries. They've damaged them. They've dropped from number 1 or 2 in the world to number 20 to number 30 in the world by controlling pharmaceutical pricing. A political decision like that can have a devastating effect on the rate and introduction of these new technologies. I'm afraid it will be the political process reflecting a public debate which is not an informed debate, which will lead to poor decisions, which will adversely affect human health and our business. That's what I worry about.
Before we leave this area, we have a question from one of the faculty members here. This question comes to us from Robert Frank, who is professor of economics, ethics, and public policy.
Some say we need lower tax rates on the wealthy to strengthen incentives to create new wealth. Others say the top earners are already working as hard as they can. Where would the incentives push them? I'm curious, gentlemen, whether you feel lower tax rates on top earners would stimulate extra productivity in your companies.
That's a hard one to guess. In startup companies, the creation of wealth is really not so dependent upon the salaries that are paid. It's basically ownership situation. We're not so concerned about the large salaries in our industry.
I agree with that entirely, but the real issue is capital gains and can you get stock options? There are countries where you can't get stock options. The reason that there are now 250 biotech companies in Germany and 3 in France is because they don't grant stock options in France. So I don't think the premise of that question is correct. We work as hard as we possibly can. The people with us, I think, work as hard as they possibly can. They're not concerned about their tax on their income. They may be concerned about capital gains taxes, but that's distant. It's the fundamental feature that we can incentivize people with ownership in the venture that's the most important.
Yes, the rest of the world has managed to arrange their politics so that entrepreneurship is killed, and that's a tremendous advantage we have here in the United States, the free-flowing capital, relatively unregulated environment, and that's key.
Do you think it also helps the fact that you can spread the wealth through stock options and stuff? It's not like maybe J.P. Morgan or where he took almost all of it. You're making millionaires if it works out of secretaries and folks far down the food chain?
That absolutely happens in our company. Every employee is a shareholder, and although it's not distributed particularly uniformly, even people that come in administrative roles early in the company's life will be millionaires or perhaps multimillionaires as the company is successful.
Is running your own company a necessary burden to get to where you want to get? Or if you had your druthers, would you hire somebody to do it?
If I could find someone who were quick enough, nimble enough, and still maintain the control, then that could be a very pleasant arrangement.
Well, it doesn't sound like you're talking about a CEO, though. If you want to be in control of the company, and you want somebody as quick and nimble as you are, but you would still make the final decisions.
He wants to be cloned.
No, I don't think. I think the day-to-day CEOs are involved in a lot of day-to-day decisions, which most of those decisions are not particularly central to the vision and the direction of the company.
But you wouldn't mind giving up some of those meetings and other stuff
No, probably not.
Now, but
Well,
there are
I enjoy being a CEO. I think it is an aspect of control. Control is really important, as you find out when you don't have it. And I enjoy being the final decision maker. What does a CEO really do? Turns out that when you're a CEO, you are responsible for only a few fundamental things. You actually move into what I call a glass bubble. You don't actually do anything except make really important decisions that can make or break your company. Because everything that gets done physically done by someone else. There's a very strange feeling of sort of disconnect as you move into that bubble. You make the key decisions, but you cannot implement them. And I like that feeling of making the key decisions. I think it's important, and I wouldn't want to give it up, even for somebody who's efficient.
You absolutely have to make the key decisions. Otherwise, you've lost the control, and the vision will be lost.
I want to turn to an area that is described almost invariably involving the cutting-edge technologies of this new century that you're both involved in. It's very hard to predict, I realize, is when there's a breakthrough technically, it leads to businesses that the folks who created the breakthroughs couldn't have imagined. So in terms of businesses, and I'm inviting you here to blue sky this a little bit, what kind of new businesses do you think the areas that you're involved in might see in the foreseeable future?
Bandwidth, I believe, is the market for bandwidth for communication capability is a truly elastic market. And as the cost of this, people have called it a commodity, and sometimes they're afraid of that, but it doesn't concern me too much, as long as you're the lowest cost provider of that commodity. As the cost of bandwidth drops, each time it drops, there's more and more applications that are enabled, and it's like a pyramid, continues to grow, because as the cost of bandwidth goes down, there's more and more applications that are enabled, which at a higher cost, they couldn't have been enabled. So the internet, as we have it today, if we were all paying $1 an hour to be on the internet, it wouldn't be taking off like it is today. So it's an elastic market. It enables commerce today.
Just to follow up one very mundane area. I remember years ago doing a wireless panel on wireless communication and asking questions about who would pay for phone calls if they bounced all over the world, and George Gilder on the panel said, "You don't get this at all. These phone calls are going to be free in 10 years. We all thought, well, right. Do you see the day when we actually, we're getting 5 cents a minute? It's pretty close.
Maybe you'll see it in a few months. People will get voice for free as long as they buy a package of higher bandwidth services. Absolutely.
Now, we've already talked about one of the more speculative notions that you have, the idea that we're actually going to change the notion of what we mean by living things. Mm-hmm. Is that a couple of centuries away in your view, or a lot closer than that?
It's a lot closer than that. I think that the future I see is a fusion between material science and biology. I've even given it a name. I call it atomic scale engineering. We are going to take all the instruments, the communication instruments, the computers, and reduce it in size to the size of the architectural element of an atom. And when we do that, we will be using principles that come from biology. I predict in the next 10 years, we're going to see a new kind of school grow up here at Cornell or around the country where biologists, chemists, physicists work together to create this new material world. It's beginning to happen. If you look at the front page of the New York Times in recent past, you would have seen a Yale professor announcing the creation of a new company in which you grow computer chips in a test tube. You don't etch them into silicon. That's the beginning of this new technology.
It also sounds, to go back to what we talked about a few minutes ago, that you could be talking about using living things to be your pharmaceutical company's factory. Am I right about that? That you could actually, or you think that's not in the future?
I think the way we will manufacture our future computers and electronic devices will be by reproduction. So you won't actually make them, they will make themselves. And eventually they'll be created in such a way that you can select them to perform the task you want and improve their own function.
Now let's just stop for a second, because I noticed you were getting kind of interested in this, even though it's not your field.
Those are obviously very difficult questions to deal with. One thing about our industry is that I guess we don't think of these laser systems as living things, and maybe we will in the future, but today we don't. We think of just learning about how the laser systems work and thinking about how to utilize that more efficiently.
You have an easier ethical dilemma. I mean, it may be that Jerry Springer's carried on your optical network, but that's not your moral responsibility. But it does seem to me that we are in an area that, you said it earlier, we don't have to think about these things.
Yes, we are. But let me point out something. I think if you were to interview the two of us 10 years from now, we might be in the same business. Exactly the same business. He wants to make devices that communicate with light that may be much smaller than cockroaches. I might want to be making surgical instruments that go inside our brain, that communicate with each other, that use his technology to do some biological purpose.
So,
and I can see that happening.
So the information and bioengineering worlds may become...
That's right.
You could actually merge your companies.
Maybe. Or create a new one.
Or create a new one.
That's more like what we do.
Let me turn to a question from another faculty member here. This is from Elizabeth Mannix, who's Associate Professor of Organizational Behavior.
Given that you work at the intersection of science and business, it would seem that creativity and innovation are critical to your success. What do you do to foster creative thinking within your own organizations?
First of all, you look for someone that's creative. And then once you've recruited these key people, give them the rope. Give them enough rope, maybe that they can cause themselves some trouble, but let them be responsible for what they do. That's really the way to make a successful company.
My job is to hire people who are better than I am. That's what you try to do. You deliberately try to find people who are smarter, harder working than you are. And if you do that, you'll get people who are the right kind of people for your company.
That's right. You've got to hire very bright people. If you start hiring only people who are not as smart as you, then you're in real trouble.
I find if I hire people only as smart as me, I'm in real trouble.
In a moment, we're going to turn to some questions from our audience here at Cornell University, but first, some background on the Johnson Graduate School of Management.
코넬 대학은 뉴욕주의 한 언덕에 위치해 있습니다. 존슨 경영대학원의 학생 수는 560명밖에 되지 않아 교수대 학생 비율이 1대 10을 자랑하죠. 1998년 존슨 경영대학원은 비즈니스 위크지가 뽑은 미국 최고 경영대학원 중에서 10단계나 뛰어올라 8위를 차지했습니다.
Okay, I'd like now to ask our audience of future MBAs, they hope, if they have any questions for our guests. Please tell us your name and then your question.
My name is Andrea Turner, and I find it very interesting that the two of you are here tonight for me on a personal note, because I happen to work in research field that's at the merging of both of your areas in between biology and engineering. I do research in the area of nanobiotechnology. And a lot of us in nanobiotechnology are very concerned because there seem to be a lot of misconceptions about what it is that we do. And we'd like to know what it is that you're doing in your part to make sure that the public is educated and that there aren't a lot of misconceptions in what it is that's involved in these areas.
Let me take that first. First of all, I'd like to meet you afterwards. I'm very interested in people who are working in nano biotechnology. It's an extremely interesting area, as I think I've mentioned, and there are very few of you. But I think that as CEOs, we have a great deal of responsibility for communicating in situations like this to the public, communicating with politicians who make decisions, participating in think tanks. But being in Washington, I'm now part of some of our most important think tanks to help disseminate these ideas and to be a leader in education as well as technology. I think it's a responsibility of corporate leaders in our position to do that.
My name's Ken Tmetzko, and my question to you is, what do you think the business schools can do to better prepare managers to go into your two fields?
That's a difficult question. Again, both of our businesses are extremely technical. And the problem that we see, in fact, in our sales and marketing force, if you don't understand how it works, it's very difficult to articulate to a customer why they should buy it.
Hi, my name is Brian Thomas. My question is for either of you. You both expressed a preference for maintaining control of your companies and also for playing the role of David in your industries. But you've also both expressed an optimism about someday becoming the Goliath in your industry. At what point will your companies become too large to suit your preferences?
I don't know that the assumption is correct there. An entity can become very large and still be very successful. Hewlett-Packard, for example, is a company that is a really very large company. When they started their printer business, they already had a successful computer business, but they didn't let the computer guys run it. They had a whole new division. They sent 5 people, sales, marketing, engineering, accounting, off to the hinterlands, and they built that printer business and now dominate the computer printer business today.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have the same vision, that it's large isn't necessarily slow. I hope our company becomes large, and I hope when it becomes large, it stays innovative. And if it stays innovative, it can continue to grow, even though quite large.
Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Greg Crowley. I was formerly a research engineer before I decided to attend business school. I have a background in engineering, both
Hire that guy right there.
bachelor's and a master's level. And I'm curious as to what it is that you gentlemen have been able to do to maintain that fire in your belly so that you can stay focused on the technology issues that help develop your careers.
It's very easy. I love biology. I love what I do. I love the knowledge that comes and the pleasure that comes from our ability to understand living systems. In terms of business skills, I think I acquired most of those as a professor when I had to raise money for my own research. I had to account for 100 different sources of money. I had to motivate a whole department that I created. So the skills I use as a businessman are identical to the skills I had to exercise as a successful entrepreneurial professor. I think the cognitive dissonance comes from people not understanding what a successful research professor actually does.
Thank you very much for those questions. I want to thank our audience at Johnson's Cornell School for being here. Thanks to, of course, to our guests, Dr. David Huber of Corvus Corporation, Dr. Wiliam Haseltine of Human Genome Sciences. Before we leave, this final thought. I want you to imagine yourself in another era at the breakthroughs of Alexander Graham Bell or Thomas Edison or Marconi or Madame Curie or Einstein and thinking, well, I guess all the exciting work has already been done. Well, from our perspective, we know now how short-sighted such thoughts would have been back then. In our era, our own time, we've just met 2 men whose visions, if they become reality, will change everything from how we inform and educate and entertain ourselves and each other to how long and well we will live. And to paraphrase that song, they've only just begun. So I hope this meeting of the minds has helped contribute to the world's marketplace of ideas because, after all, that is the business of CEO Exchange. I'm Jeff Greenfield. Thank you. Take care. Thank you very much.
Nice to meet you.
But I'm especially happy to see my friend.
I'm so pleased. Oh, great. Hey, well, you got to come work for us.
Actually, my last project, I just came from a bio meeting this morning where I was on a panel, which the topic was...
What happened in the computer industry in the last 20 years, and the telecom industry is going to take place in 2 or 3 years.
Well, you have to look at like your glass, half full or half empty. This time last year, my company was trading at 8 times less than what it's trading today.
I'd go to a company that had those type of productivity gains and do software for them. That way I'd get part of the money.
Actually, if you read what we've done, you can figure out what we will do. Okay?
What we make are those big pipes that carry information from one place to another. So we make